Hey hey, it's TDA and welcome to episode 9 of this Dyson Sphere Let's Play. This is our perfect ratio run and we are going to make some perfect ratios today. In fact, we're going to make two builds because both of them are quite straightforward, yet important. And yeah, so let's get on with that. We are going to make a build for drones, which is basically the little brother of our bigger build over here in the upper side of the screen. And we are going to make a build for solar panels. Solar panels, of course, being extremely important if you want to expert anywhere outside of your initial planet. Well, to be honest, they're useful on your own planet as well. Specifically if, of course, that planet actually has a decent amount of sunlight reaching the planet, which, as we've seen on our current system, is not actually the case on our own planets, but generally speaking you will find a lot of planets where you can use that, and they're small, efficient. You can put down a lot of them, and if you put around 1,000 in a belt across the planet, you'll have more than enough energy for pretty much anything you need on the planet. It's very cool to have, but that means you're going to need a lot of them. Drones, on the other hand, as you might have seen in the comments in this run, I actually suggest not to use them too much. They're really efficient. No, they are actually not really efficient. They are very easy to use. That's what I was looking for. They will fly anywhere on your planet and get stuff from A to B, but they only carry a very tiny amount of resources. You can put 50 of them in a logistics center, so that's compensating a little bit for the fact that one by one they transport almost nothing, but they also cost a lot of energy. Now, this is not really noticeable if you just have a few logistics stations with a few dozen of these drones flying around, but if you have dozens of ILSs and PLSs and hundreds of drones flying around your planet, looks really cool. So that is a reason, a completely valid reason to use them, but it will drain your energy quite a lot compared to just doing the exact same thing with belts or trying to limit the amount of stuff you need to transport from place A to B by simply making sure your builds are efficient. And that is what we're doing in this one. Still, I'm going to make that drone build, and that is what we're going to do now, because I know a lot of people do want to use drones, and there's nothing wrong with that, and they do have their uses. Now, drones are actually quite simple. We are going to place, I think, the initial building around about here. And what we are going to be producing is actually a few things. So hold on, let me get this right. We will need a belt over here. We are going to need a longer belt over here. And we are going to need a similar belt over here. And then we are going to use this for our drones. Now, drones, where are you? Here you are. Drones are being produced at 1 per 4 seconds. I'm actually going to double that production, so we're going to make 1 per 2 seconds. Mainly because if you have one ILS and you're going to put that full of drones, that's already 50 drones. And if you're going to put down a few of those, you can actually quickly run out of drones. So you might as well produce a lot of them. And if you don't need a lot of them, make sure you set a cap on the production ILS, or at least the place that you feed them into, so that you don't overproduce them. It also helps the ratios being a little nicer. We are going to need some simple iron, so that's not that complicated. We'll also need processors. Not the most complicated either, but probably the most annoying part of this build. And we are going to need an item that we haven't actually built yet, and that's the thrusters. Thrusters, quite straightforward, just some steel and copper. So like I said, this is not going to be a complicated build, but it's a pretty nice one anyway. We are going to need exactly a 2-to-1 ratio for thrusters and drones, so that means we have 2 over here. And because there's 3 belts in between here, I am going to put the we can't actually directly connect them, so we will need to put this on a belt in order to get it off the belt as well. Now you might be wondering, why don't you just take out this belt and then do it directly like that? And that is because we will have other places where we have 3 belts, and I like to keep things symmetric, so we might as well use the space if we have it. But otherwise, yes, you could easily take out this belt and simply connect it directly. But this is just to keep it a little neater. Now, we need twice as many thrusters as we need drones. So we are also going to need 2 more of those. And these ones we are going to simply put in over here. And then have them feed directly into the drone facility. Now, thrusters, they need some iron and they need some copper. And now you might be wondering, hey, TDA, you just put 2 of them on this side and 2 of them on that side. Doesn't that split up your resource production as well? Yes, that's correct. Once again, not the most complicated build, so I had some fun with it and just wanted to make it nice and symmetric. So that is what we're going to do. I might actually be just 1 space off here in terms of really keeping it nicely inside my lines. But we'll worry about that in a second. Now, what do we need here? We are going to need some copper. So this is actually going to be our copper belt. And we need copper for this. And we do not need copper for this, but we will need that for thrusters. We also need some steel for the thrusters, so that will be over here. And then on the other side, what we're going to need is, of course, the processors. And they will be on this belt. And then we need some iron to go along with that on this belt. And that does mean, of course, that we are going to need the copper and steel over here as well. And in this case, that means we are going to put the copper on the bottom belt and the steel on the top belt, which is kind of like we are doing it here as well, but just with a little different structure. Okay, now what else? We are going to need some processors. Now, processors, we are going to need 3 of. And processors need a few things, so I'm going to put down a 4th one straight away. And we have been using this in a few builds as well, so you might be able to dream up these ratios by now. Because we've been using processors in the last 3 builds, I think. But they need circuit boards and need components. They actually don't need that many circuit boards, so this 1 circuit board production should be able to keep up with these 3 processors. It's actually a little bit more than we need, I think. But the other important element that goes into these processors are the components, and those are, of course, these. And they will need some silicon and they will need some copper. So there we go. And thank you, autosave. We will need to put these on a belt in order to be able to supply them to all the processor units. So these are going to be the processors. We already have iron on this belt, and then this belt is going to be processors. There we go, and that will feed into there. Now, we are actually quite far already with this build. We are also going to need some silicon for these, and we are going to build that silicon right up here. So we are going to have to put in a belt, and that's going to be nice and easy over here. Of course, we're also going to need to get in the steel, and we are going to need to get in the copper over here. There you go. Now remember, this also needs copper, so this copper actually serves 2 uses. It goes into the thrusters and it goes into the components. And then we are going to need around 8, no, not around, exactly 8 units of smelters producing silicon. That should feed us all the silicon we need in this build. Now, we are going to need to get the silicon from somewhere. So for the moment, I am just going to put it like that. This is a longer build than it needs to be, but it doesn't really matter for the moment. We are also going to need some steel. And if you remember one of my previous builds, you can directly make steel from iron, of course. And it's a 1-to-1 ratio. If you want to actually connect it with directly like this, you will need to put in 1 space in between. So that's what I'm doing over here. But that means that you can put the next iron facility, or sorry, steel facility close to the other one, because this doesn't actually need to be connected to this. And basically do it on and on like that. Now we are going to need 3 on each side, so that is nicely done doing it like this. And of course we do need to feed that with some base materials as well. But don't forget, we need an outgoing belt as well. That's going to be this one. And this will be an outgoing belt of steel. So let's put it on here so that we remember that. This is going to be the input for the silicon. Now there's a few ways you can do it, but I am actually not necessarily going to make the most logical decision here, but again, just making it look neat. This is going to be an incoming belt for copper, and this is going to be an incoming belt for iron. Now remember, you can cover 3 spaces, so this iron belt will actually be close enough to feed into the iron facilities over there. So the fact that it's a little bit illogical that it's so far away doesn't really matter. You can also switch that around. That also doesn't really matter, to be honest. Might actually be more logical, but yeah, that's okay. Depends on your preference. You can swap those belts around if you want to. But the reason that we're putting copper on this belt is that we are going to need some copper production. And we are actually not going to need that much copper, but we actually do need a little bit extra iron. Because remember that we also need some iron all the way down here for the inputs for the circuit boards. And this is actually going to be our circuit board iron. And we have the copper over here as well, which is going to be used for several purposes. Now, the little annoying thing here is that we actually are going to need to connect all these belts to where they need to go. But because of the way we constructed this, this should be aligning quite nicely. So this is going to be our belt for the copper over here. Then what we can do is we can put a belt like this and connect that nice and straight into the iron production over here, which I personally really like that way. And we are going to put an identical number. Oh, there's going to be a belt in between, of course. We're going to basically do the same thing over here with the copper, and then we are going to connect 3 more smelters smelting copper over here, and again 2 more smelters smelting iron over here. So once again, this is also going to be a copper belt, and this is going to be the iron belt. Okay, almost done with this small build, because now the last thing we need is some more iron over here. That's actually not going to be, that's actually going to be the iron for this, but it's also going to be the iron that we need for the steel production. That's steel over there, some iron over there, some more steel over here, some more iron over there. And then some more steel and some more iron. So it's exactly symmetric with the other one on the other side. Now remember, splitting up your copper and iron is not necessarily the most efficient if you do it like this in terms of the belts, etc. But all in all, it looks pretty good. There is one downside of doing this actually, and that is because we need a little less iron on this side than we do on the other side. And we have, sorry, not iron, copper. We need a little bit more copper upstairs than we need downstairs. There's an easy way to fix that, and that is just put in a few sorters like this. This will initially transport some copper over here and then transport a lot of copper back. Both of these belts will saturate quite quickly, but this just makes sure that these belts are connected to each other, and any surplus on one belt is going to be at some point transferred to the other belt. You could actually flip it around as well, but the reason I put it, flip it around over here as well. The reason I put it here is that by default that means that there's a little less going on this belt in this direction than there will be going up in that direction. Because of the fact that we need a little bit more on this side, it makes sense to do it that way. If you put them next to each other, they will pretty much cancel each other out. They will still have the required effect, so as soon as one of the belts starts stacking up, of course you'll have an overflow going on the other belt. But it's small details that matter, at least in a build like this. Yeah, and that is pretty much it. Of course, we do need to put in some sorters. So remember, the sorters for the iron are going in directly like this into the steel and then onto the belt, etc. But I will connect everything else up in a second. Now, this is only one build. But this will be enough to get one drone per 2 seconds. And what I like to do, because you can either put an ILS on this side, but if you see here in this build, this will be an input for iron ore. If you look at the details of this build, you will see we only need 3 materials. So what you can actually do is have the 3 materials being flown in. The 4th slot is going to be for the warpers. We don't have them yet, but once again, I do take that into account in these builds already. And then we have a 5th slot. What can you do with a 5th slot? Well, you can simply put your output back into the ILS that supplied all the raw materials. For example, going all the way around like this. And then make sure that you get your outgoing and your ingoing materials in the same ILS, and therefore you only have to place 1 of them rather than 2. Small thing, you can put 1 on the other side if you want, but in this build there's really no need to, so you can put it like that. And of course these belts are a little bit longer than they need to be, but as soon as you place the ILS, that will sort itself out. I'm actually not going to place the ILS just yet because we have a second build, and because we put them close together, you do need to be a little bit careful on where you place this stuff. So the second build is going to be our pretty much most important small build, I think, for now, and that is going to be the solar panels. Now, solar panels are pretty straightforward. They only need a few interesting materials, or not even that much to be honest, but you are going to need a lot of them. Now, let's say we put this over here. I'm actually going to put down, just making sure we have the correct spacing. We need 3 in between. And these distances can be a little bit deceiving. This belt is not going to be here. We are going to make solar panels, and as you can see, we need only base materials really for this. So some copper, we need some silicon, and we need some circuit boards. So by itself, it's not that complicated, but it's a nice fun build, and it's good to have a decent production of these things, because if you just put in 1 or 2, it will take forever to really start up the productions. And especially if you're using blueprints like those from mine, my playthrough, for example, you're going to notice that you will want a lot of solar panels, but you don't actually have a lot of solar panels. Now, the solar panels are actually going to be exported into the ILS as well. So let's put them on this belt, and we are going to need a few materials for them. Most importantly, we are going to need some silicon, and I'm going to use one of my favorite types of builds when it comes to smelting facilities. And that is a build like this, where we're going to use a single belt on the inside, supplying the raw materials, and then have the smelters on the outside. We are going to need quite a lot of smelters when it comes to the silicon, because if we check out the recipe, silicon is only produced at 1 per 2 seconds. So that's actually not that fast. Not a big deal. But it is something to take into account when you're making these builds, that it might not be as quick as you might expect. So that means that we need a lot of these smelters. Now, this is going to be simple ore going in, and then what I like doing is flip those around and have this rocket type of build where those 2 belts combine into 1 and then feed into the facilities. That takes care of all the silicon that we need for the build. So as you can see, this is 18 silicon smelters actually, and that is because these things are extremely hungry when it comes to resources. Now, one thing to keep in mind if you're on the same seed as I am now, so on the same planet as I am now, these things are really hungry when it comes to copper. And if you remember, if we check out our planet, we only have 1 million copper left. That's still quite a lot, of course, but it's only 1 million, and it's pretty much the only that we have in our system. If you click on your sun, you can check the entire resources in your planet. So as you can see, we only have 1.6 million copper ore in our entire system. 1.6 will be enough to do pretty much everything we want for now, but it does mean that there is a limited amount of that stuff going around. And for example, if you do build one of those full belts of solar panels, which will use up 1,000 of them, that's going to be 1,000 times 10 copper ore. So that means that you are using 10,000 copper ore on just those solar panels for just one belt around your planet. And that's not, of course, taking into account any signs that you're making, any drones that you're making, any vessels that you're making, etc, etc. So you do need copper for a lot of things, not in huge amounts. So it's not like iron, for example. You can never have enough iron production, but of course there is still quite a lot of that going around. Okay, so we're not quite done yet, sorry for the long speech, because we are going to need to do a few more things. We are going to need some circuit boards. We are going to get them from over here, and we are also going to need some copper. Now, of course, we need both of these things on both sides of the build over here, because we have half of our solar panels being built over this side. So we just flip those around and do it like that. Now, in terms of spacing things out, this is going to be a little bit different from the 6 below. We only need 3 circuit board productions actually, but I am going to space them out a little bit. Why? Because I am going to directly insert the iron over here, and then of course that does mean that I need to place these correctly, because otherwise this won't work. You need 2 iron smelters for 1 of these, so we need to make sure that we space them out correctly. And if we do it like this, you can put these, if you press tab, remember, if you're placing these down, if you press tab, you can space them out nice and even. We are going to need to space these out like this. And then we have the circuit boards over here, and we are able to plug in the iron directly into the circuit boards like this. And that is nice and easy. Now remember, we are going to have to get copper on this belt. That's nice, because we're actually going to use copper in this circuit board production as well. This is going to be the circuit boards themselves. They are going to flip all the way around, so that also means we will end up having some circuit boards over here. Actually, they're going to be on this belt, and the copper is going to be on this belt. There we go. Now, that leaves the copper, and we are going to need quite a lot of copper, as we already mentioned. So let's make sure we have a copper facility over here, and then we're going to need 13 copper actually. And yes, that's a little bit of a weird number, but that's because buildings tend to be quite annoying when it comes to the ratios involved, but we can handle that, that's not a problem. And there we go. Actually, that's not 13, that is 13. So that means we are going to need a copper ore input over here. And then once again, what we can do is flip this around, but take this in this case all the way down here. And then have a second belt over here, which is also going to be copper. So remember, copper on this belt and some more copper on this belt. Those 2 belts are going to feed into this single belt. And actually I connected it to the wrong one now. Of course it needs to go into this one. And that will mean the copper is being produced over here, combined into one belt over here, flip all the way around, so this feeds into the circuit boards, into the solar panels, go down here, and then the last remaining copper will be fed into these 3 buildings. That means we will need the input of copper ore over here, and this is going to be the input of our silicon ore. Then the last thing we can do is similar to the build above. We have the solar production over here. We only have, in this case, even 3 inputs, because I forgot to place down the iron inputs. So of course we also need some iron over here, and these are going to be iron smelting facilities. There we go. Like that. We only have 3 inputs. So 3 inputs plus warpers plus the solar panels over here. So these will be on this belt. Means we have a total of 5. So 1 ILS is able to do both the demand and supply side of this build, along with the warpers. And of course, if you already built the warpers in a different place, what you could actually do is combine these 2 builds, have both the drones and the solar panels feed into the ILS that is also supplying the iron ore over here, the copper, the silicon over here, but the same here, iron, copper, and silicon, so you can feed into both of these builds at the same time. And then have the outputs go both into the ILS as well. Then you don't have a room in your slot available in your ILS to request warpers, but you can feed them in directly, for example, from this ILS over here. This will also be requesting the warper, so then you can just feed them in straight, and they will be registered by the ILS as supply, and just not requested by that ILS specifically directly. It's up to you. I will probably just use 2 different ILSs for each, but you can just bring it down to 1 if you want. Alright, I am going to go and hook all of these things up, make sure it's being supplied, steal some vessels from my build over here. 71 already being produced, so that's going to go quite nicely. All the materials are being flown in from the other planet, and yes, I even have copper production on the other planet. And we should hopefully also have some ILSs available now. Look, there's already 10 of them. I'll probably lower this amount to 100. And yeah, all in all, this is going pretty great. I don't think I even scaled this up in terms of the vessels completely yet. Oh, I did. But they're all flying around already. This is just a slow build. Okay, be right back while I fix the inputs. Alright, and there we go. I worked all through the night, the Dyson Sphere night to be exact, and it's morning again, and we're done. And I connected up all the different sorters. I did make a few tiny changes to the belts because, of course, I forgot the the copper ore belt over here, and which would have made sense if I counted the belts on the other side. Added that in, move everything up 1 square. I actually did the same thing. I moved up all these assemblies with 1 square to make it a little bit more symmetric. Doesn't change about anything on how it works, but oh, okay, there's some vessels flying past. So as you can see, our things are being supplied, so that's really nice. We are making some nice solar panels. As you can see, I already put a few down, just to show you how I recommend that you use them on your own planet. Just put them in between the builds. You can of course make those nice belts around the planet, etc. They look really nice, so by all means do that. But it's really easy to kind of fill up the spaces in between. I also think this looks really neat if you kind of put them like this between the different builds. Especially once we reach the point where we kind of have all these production facilities out of here. You might as well use the space in between the builds if you can, and of course you get a little bit extra power from that. We do actually start to need quite a bit of power, partially because I kind of broke my own rule and I'm using the vessels from these ILSs rather than having them supplied to my production facilities. The reason I did that is actually because I currently don't actually have any mining facilities on other planets other than the 1 or 2 ILS. I think it's only 1 actually that I put over there, so that all by itself is not going to be able to supply my production facilities on this core planet. So that means that the next thing I will be doing is actually putting up some production facilities on other planets. I do have some tips about that as well, and since that's actually a question that comes up a lot, how you deal with placing all those miners late game and things like that, I'm actually probably going to make a video about that. But all in all, that's not that exciting to watch. So make sure you do actually start to consider making some production on your other planets now. And by production, I mean make sure you put down the miner so the raw inputs are available for your core production on the main planet, and your vessels have somewhere to pick up that raw resources from. Let's see, did I forget to mention anything over here? I don't think so. So remember, the drones are actually going straight into this building over here. As you can see, I actually just put it down, so the resources are still in transit. Once again, I'm getting everything from a different planet, but if you of course plug in some of your iron and copper facilities on this planet, that's a little bit more straightforward. And as you can see, I'm not using any drones, but please feel free to use drones in your own builds if you want them. Once again, they kind of look cool, they're just not that efficient. Last but not least, we have this facility over here. I actually also moved the smelters here a little bit again to make it a bit more symmetric. And we have the facilities over here. Now remember, this empty spot, this is intended to request warpers, just like we have the same empty spot over here. So once you unlock warpers, don't forget to go back to the previous builds and actually put them in. And if you're using these builds in one of your own playthroughs where you already have them unlocked, don't forget to add them in. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this one. Not the most complicated builds this time around, so that's why you got 2. And from this point on, I think we will be able to progress really nicely into the end game, where we are going to be looking at purple science, green science, and of course some Dyson Sphere constructions as well over the next few weeks. So I hope you enjoy. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't yet and you're watching this, because if by this time you're still watching, you probably like the content. And don't forget to like the videos. It really helps the YouTube algorithm find them, because apparently people like them, so they get recommended to others as well. So if you want to help me out, please do. Alright, catch you in the next one.